Hello, my name is Dana Ingram. I am the Executive Director for JC Vision and Associates. And today we're going to have just a sidebar chat on reimagining the Fair Housing Act. And today we're going to talk a little bit about tenant landlord issues and how as a tenant you can avoid issues with your landlord and how to avoid it going into a fair housing complaint with HUD. And today I have with me is our testing coordinator, James Lewis Jr. Thank you.
How you doing?
And we also have the assistant testing coordinator, Mark Robertson.
How you doing?
And we're going to just have a conversation here that's going to be really relaxed, and we're giving you a peek view of what we discuss every day as issues around the table. And hopefully this discussion will help you make some really good decisions as a housing consumer, as you're getting ready to go ahead and rent and looking at the Fair Housing Act. My first question, let me say this. The Georgia Landlord Tenant Handbook, you can go ahead and search this on the internet. It is a book that you must read if you're looking to be a housing provider. It is one that guides you and lets you know what the Georgia law is regarding tenants and their relationships with their landlords. So let's go ahead and get started. We were talking briefly before we started about the Fair Housing Act and what it is. James, would you like to go ahead and let everyone know what the Fair Housing Act is?
Oh, of course. The Fair Housing Act is it comes from the Civil Rights Act that came after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And what the Fair Housing Act is, it is a prohibition against or laws that have been made up to stop or prohibit housing providers to discriminate against a person that falls under one of the 7 protected classes that the Department of Housing and Urban Development they actually investigate to make sure that doesn't happen. So you have the 7 protected classes of race, color, religion, familiar status, sex, gender or sex orientation, and also disability.
And national origin.
Excuse me. So therefore, as long as a person can actually fall under one or multiple of those 7 protected classes, and therefore you as a person that falls in one of those protected classes, you can actually adhere to the laws of the Federal Fair Housing Act in order to make sure that you're living in safe and sanitary housing.
So what I heard you say was that the 7 categories are race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familiar status, and disability.
Yes. Now, let me make sure I be clear. Those are the 7 protected categories that the Department of Housing and Urban Development prohibit any violations or laws against. Now, there are different, because of we have so many different states, state laws actually are equivalent to the same.
Georgia state law is equivalent.
So, yes, ma'am. And so therefore, some states may have similar protected classes or have all of the 7 protected classes and maybe a few extras. But the main ones that JC Vision and Associates we adhere to is the Federal Fair Housing Act, which is the 7 protected classes in which HUD prohibits violations against.
Okay. So now when we talk about the Fair Housing Act and the 7 protected classes,
yes, ma'am.
I want to reiterate that this is basically discrimination can take place in different areas. It could be taking place in refusal to rent, refusal to sell, different terms and conditions of a lease agreement and all.
So correct.
And we're going to go over a lot of that as we have this discussion and everything.
Oh,
like
yes,
that.
ma'am. That's totally understandable.
Now, one of the things that I also want to talk about is we want to start out with the lease.
Okay.
Let's just talk about what is a lease. What?
Cool. That's great. A lease is basically, in the basic general term, it's a contract. It's a contract between yourself as a tenant and the person that owns that property. And now there are going to always be different provisions inside a lease in which a housing provider can apply to their contract in order for you to read over and sign if you are in agreement to all those provisions. Now, one thing that you said earlier about why it's important for the Georgia Tenant Landlord book to be read by housing providers, I'd like to piggyback and say that tenants also need to be responsible in reading this book as well, because it gives you a lot of good information as a tenant to give a better understanding of what your responsibilities are in that contract that you sign with this housing provider. So that is a very good thing to say, and I agree with. And again, basically, it's 2 parties having a document with rules, regulations, and other statements inside of it that they both are agreeing on, and the agreeing is by them both signing at the very end, saying that the housing provider is gonna perform these duties, and they're responsible for this, this, and this, and the tenant is responsible for these duties and this, and this. Number one, paying your rent. The provision of how much the unit is going to be or the home is going to be, what date is it going to be due by, and what's going to happen to you if you don't pay by this particular date. That's basically one of the first things in the lease. But we also state that to all our clients, please read your lease, even if it's 75 pages. Take the time and read that lease before you sign your name on it.
Now, Mark, what are some of the other things that you think are important that are outlined in a lease that a housing consumer needs to really be looking at?
One of the biggest things you need to look at is the late fees associated with paying your rent. It will outline in your lease what day the late fee takes effect, how much the late fee is, how you pay your rent. They also give you certain provisions as far as what you can and can't do, whether or not you can have somebody come and visit and stay for certain amounts of time. There's different housing providers that have different rules on that. Some are saying you can only have somebody stay 14 days total throughout the entire calendar year. Well, if somebody comes and stays for 7, now you can only have somebody come for 7 more days throughout the rest of the entire year. Those are big things you need to pay attention to, as well as what to do. There's in the lease, there's outlined what you do if you have issues or problems. How you call in work orders, how you make your landlord or the property management company aware of any issues you're having, steps you take in doing these things, whether you can do rent and deduct, which is where if the landlord is not wanting to make a repair, you can actually get the repair done and you can provide a copy of the receipt and subtract that from your monthly rent. There's different things like that that are generally outlined in a lease that you need to pay attention to.
And the rent and deduct thing was a good thing to state because I remember when I had a conversation with some code enforcement officers and we spoke about the rent and deduct subject. But one thing about the rent and deduct subject that is very valuable to you as a tenant is the fact, like what code enforcement says, is to always document everything that you do. So it's not that you go and give a repair, you say you need a repair and then they take 2 days and then all of a sudden you go and get it and say, oh, well, I took care of it, so I just take it out of my rent. No, you still have to give that property manager or housing provider a reasonable amount of time. And a good way to judge that or measure that is by having it fully documented. And these days you can even do it through a text message. It gives a date stamp and a time stamp. So therefore, quite naturally, because if you try the rent and deduct tactic, it's going to cause an issue to what that property manager probably want to take you to magistrate court about or small claims court. Well, okay, if that's the case, you'll have the receipts to show you made this repair issue aware of with this person at this date and time. This amount of time went by. Then you went and started actually doing it yourself, and then therefore you deducted it from the rent, which is totally fine. But you got to make sure you follow all the steps first before doing that, because of the fact it's going to cause a lot of issues in the near future if that housing provider hasn't read that house in this tenant landlord book, or if you hadn't read it and followed the instructions to its entirety. But you make a good point, man.
Now, we talk about the lease, but I think we probably need to go ahead and back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because I heard you say something about taking pictures and all.
Yes, you did.
And so let's go back. Let's go back. So when I'm looking for an apartment and all, and I go to see an apartment and I go ahead, and let's start at the very beginning when I'm looking for an apartment. And we're going to come back to the lease.
Okay.
So if I'm looking for an apartment and I actually see one, what is the right process for me to be looking for that apartment? If they say for the housing provider says that I want you to go ahead and take a look at it, are there documents that I need to bring in? Is there going to be like a background check going on? What are the things that I need to look for in that process that and some of the things that may come up that I might go, this might be a fair housing complaint.
That's a good question. Well, one thing about it is I would suggest that don't go into a place looking to create a fair housing complaint. Number one, because that already creates a very, very volatile tenant landlord relationship. But now you have rights as a tenant, do not get me wrong. And if you see things that are not adding up and not up to your standard while you're continually paying rent on time, then yes, you may fall within the lines of a fair house complaint, in which you can come to us or another fair house initiative program and try to see if they can help you file a complaint on your behalf. But it's just like you said, to start from the very beginning, you just take some of your natural resources or natural instincts in with you, whether it's the first time you're looking for a home compared to if you've done this a number of times. Because quite naturally, on the bottom end of it, a lot of things are going to be the same. Your application is usually the same. Where you have to put your name, date of birth, where you stayed at before, where you were employed at, and things of that nature. But therefore also too, understand about the background check and know how far they're looking back on the background check. And you would know better than the person you're doing an application to if you have something on your record and how long ago it was. So it's just pretty much finding a way to make sure that you're taking some experiences that you had in housing, whether it be when you stay with your mom and dad, compared to when you're out on your own, to when you start that process from the beginning. You know where you want to stay, the type of place you want to stay, how it should look. There should be a standard.
But so what I'm also saying is that when I was thinking about is that as a person that's looking for a place to live, and I go into a place and let's say they say, well, in order for you to go ahead and look at this place, you need to give us a photo ID. Now, is that a fair housing complaint?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So what about if they say, well, you need to go ahead and pay this application fee? Is this a fair housing complaint?
No, ma'am. Most places, 99%, will have an application fee. And when you actually do your application, a lot of times they'll have an administrative fee that goes with it. And that starts the process of your background check. And at that point, what they do is, when you first come in, you'll do the application, or 9 times out of 10, they'll take you to the unit, let you look at it, see if you like it. Then you'll go back to the office. You can start the application at that point, and then you'll pay the application fee and the administration fee. And then if your background check comes back and it's clean, they will give you a call and let you know, hey, your background check came back, everything's good. If you want to, secure this apartment, then we can bring you in. You can pay the security deposit, which is going to be X amount based off of your rental history, based off of your credit report, and based off of your background check.
Well, let's say I have a criminal record.
Okay.
Now, is that, and they deny me because they said that I have something on my criminal record that they don't agree with, therefore I'm denied. Now, is that a fair housing complaint?
Yes and no, because of the fact I would say yes if if your criminal record was similar to someone else that's already on the property and they allowed them to stay, and it's of a different protected class. If I'm making sense, number one. But then no, because of the fact that if the criminal record that you may obtain or have with you, if the offense along with the date that you were actually sentenced by the judge, if that's within the look back period, within the stipulations of the state or where you reside in, or the federal fair housing complaint, if they, for example, if they use a background check company that goes back 8 years, and this offense that you had happened 7 years ago, when really they should only went back 3 years. Therefore, if they go back and use what you did 8 years ago, then quite naturally they're going to be affecting a large portion of people, because 8 years ago, I was a different person. And I could have cleaned myself up, did everything right, and yet you're still holding this against me, and then you're going to do nothing but create homelessness with these type of people that have criminal records 8 years ago, if your look back period is that far back.
Do you have something to add, Mark?
With that, you also have to remember, if a lot of places they don't actually look, you can have a charge on your background check, but never got convicted.
Yep.
The charge will show on your background check, but they won't click on the next box to show that you were proven innocent. So
Good point.
with that, if they do say it's something because of your background check, you can let them know, listen, I was found innocent of that charge. And then that leads into another thing that you need to look into, which would be getting that expunged from your record.
You took that right from my head, man. That is so very right. You're so right. Especially if you already know you've done something and you did a charge, might have been on probation and things of that such, and yet you're trying to get your life back right. Go ahead and get the record expungement out the way ahead of time before you can go and apply to a place in the first place. Because application fees will add up really fast on you. And if you know in the back of your head already you have something on your background and you keep going to application fees and then you keep getting denied, obviously either you're not catching the picture or you just like giving away money for application fees. So either way, one of the two is going to come to a head, and you're going to be like, hey, what do I need to do? So yeah, record expungement, which is really, really not that expensive to get done. And therefore you get it done, then start doing the applications. You'll see a complete difference.
And let me go back and actually say that HUD has put out 2 letters. April 4th, 2016, the Office of General Counsel Guidance on Application of Fair Housing Act to the use of criminal records by providers of housing and real estate related transactions. So I really encourage people to go ahead and look that up. Again, that was April the 4th, 2016. And HUD recently put out another letter on June the 10th where they reiterate the guidance of Fair Housing Act and the standards to use of criminal records by providers in housing and real estate transactions. And there's another letter there. So, and it gives all of the information as far as what is really looked back, and like Mark was talking about also, just because you had a, what do you call, arrest record, but you were not convicted, then that is not something to go ahead and deny your application for housing. And that's really important that people know that. And if you continue to be denied for housing because of a criminal background check, that might be grounds for a fair housing complaint. And that's something that our office would help you to do free of charge if you believe that that's the reason why you continue to be denied for housing.
I totally agree.
Okay, so we talked about some of the things. We talked about deposits. So is it a fair housing complaint if they say that I need to have the first month's rent and 2 additional months' rent, so 3 months altogether? Is that a fair housing complaint?
No, ma'am. A lot of times when they do that, a lot of housing providers, the way they look at it is your security deposit and first month's rent, the security deposit portion is based off of your credit history. So if your credit is not very good, they're going to more than likely double your security deposit, which would be 2 months rent and then your first month's rent added in. But with that, those are solely based on your credit record. Those are not based on any of the 7 protected classes. Now, if you do have items on your credit record that need to be removed, there is a process for that. And here at JC Vision, we can help you do a CFPB complaint, Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and we can help get those off of your record.
Right. But I will say this though too, Mark, and Ms. Dana, is the fact that the one little small exception to that to say that it still could be a fair housing complaint, because again, if you went into this location and you had a credit score of say 550, right? And they did charge you double rent or double security deposit plus rent, which is well over within the lines. But you happen to have a friend that's a neighbor or you befriended, and you then through camaraderies and talking and everything else, you find out they came in with a credit score of 525, but didn't pay the same amount that you did. and you are two different protected classes. There might be that one small stipulation, and you can still file a fair housing complaint against the housing provider because it would be deemed different terms and conditions. Because they made you do something more than the other person that is similar situated than you, that like you, not have to do. So it's just one of those type things. It's always going to be a yes or no when it comes to filing a fair housing complaint or not, because there's so many different stipulations that can apply to one situation that won't apply to another.
But then again, I heard you say that if you got information from someone else, then you need to document that.
Correct. Not only
There needs to
document it,
be the evidence.
or get, and it's not only just document that I talked to this person on February 15th, 2023, and they told me that their credit score is this and everything. No, that's a start, but if anything else, you're going to need a little bit more evidence than that they told you that. So I don't know how special dealing with credit scores, unless you're just that tight with that person that they happen to give you the credit score that they had at the time to help you out with the complaint. But then again, if they're there and they got their less than you, pay less, but have a worse credit score than you, I don't know if they're gonna really want to give up that kind of information. So it could be considered hearsay. But I mean, I still get what you're saying, that it is very important as a due that if you're gonna want to file a complaint, or if you want to do anything to be able to address something the most professional way, documentation is your best friend.
In a situation like that, you can just ask for a copy of their lease, because the amount they pay for the security deposit will be listed in the lease. And at that point,
That's a great
once you
point.
file a fair housing complaint and Housing and Urban Development starts their investigation, they can request a copy of the individual's file, and that credit report should be in there.
Good point, and that way keep them anonymous. So yeah, you make a good. Once again, one of those little stipulations where so many different things can happen in order to qualify this fair housing complaint that won't qualify in another situation. So that's a good point.
So we're still in the application process, and then I find I have to go ahead and reveal that I have a support animal.
Okay.
And the housing provider says, well, one, we don't allow pets, but if you need your pet, we're going to have to ask for a pet deposit. Is that a fair housing complaint?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Every day, all day with the Y.
Why?
Because of the fact that falls under protected class of disability, number one. You are now just made this person that has disclosed you they have a disability, number one. Two, that they have an instrument or some type of thing that helps them with their disability. In this situation, it'd be a pet. So therefore now that animal no longer is considered a pet.
Right.
That is a part of your disability that helps you be able to carry out everyday life activities as if you were a person that didn't have a disability. So by you, or not you, but the housing provider still trying to charge a pet deposit, that housing provider is actually frustrating this person that falls under protected class of disability to be able to live their everyday lives on this property.
That, plus when you look at the pet policy in any type of residential area, does not apply to service animals and emotional support animals.
Every day.
The reasonable accommodation would be them making the exception to that policy for your emotional support animal.
Okay, so what I heard you as a wrap up of this first session is basically saying you really have to look at the situation. The process of turning in or looking for a housing could be different.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay, there's different layers of aspects in every application, in every review,
Oh, yeah.
and all of that, and also, so everything cannot just be a fair housing complaint. It really needs to be looked at closely to see if there's something that was done differently towards you because you're in a protected class, and something that was done on the benefit of somebody else that wasn't in the protected class. And that becomes the guidance for filing a fair housing complaint.
Totally agree.
Okay. In our next session, we're going to get into a little bit more about tenant landlord issues once you move into a place and live there.
If I can add one thing to this session, in this phase of the application process, right after you sign your lease, your move-in inspection will be scheduled. That is the most important day during this process. If I can harp on anything, as a former housing inspector, Go to your move-in inspection. Bring a camera. Make sure you got plenty of available space on your phone if that's what you're using. Whatever you need to do, document everything. Take pictures. Take pictures of the outside. Take pictures of the inside. Any damage you see, check all the appliances. Check all the water faucets. Check the tub. Check all the toilets. Make sure everything is functional in that house, because that right there is what all housing providers use to base what you get charged for, is based off of that day. Those pictures, that documented damage, document everything. And if the house is not clean, document it.
Very good. We'll see you in the next session. Thank you.